7 psychological blows that destroy a narcissist's ego. There are few experiences more psychologically exhausting than watching a narcissist move through life, leaving emotional damage behind them, seemingly untouched by consequence, remorse, or accountability. From the survivor's perspective, this can feel profoundly unjust. Psychologists acknowledge this frustration as a natural response to moral injury, the distress that arises when we witness repeated harm without visible consequences. It can feel as though the narcissist is immune to karma, skating through life while others carry the emotional wreckage. Yet clinicians are careful to clarify an important truth. While narcissists may appear untouchable on the surface, there are experiences that deeply wound them internally, even if those wounds are rarely visible. It is critical, however, to distinguish understanding from revenge. From a psychological standpoint, revenge almost always entangles the survivor further in the narcissist's pathology. Retaliation activates the same emotional circuits, anger, fixation, dysregulation, that the narcissist thrives on. Therapists consistently emphasize that revenge compromises the survivor's integrity and prolongs trauma bonding. Even when someone wins, they rarely walk away with inner peace. Taking the high road is not moral idealism. It is a trauma-informed strategy designed to preserve psychological health, autonomy, and self-respect. Before examining what actually hurts a narcissist, psychologists stress the importance of recognizing how narcissistic injury presents itself. Narcissists do not express pain in healthy or transparent ways. You will not hear them say, "That hurt me," with vulnerability or accountability. If they do claim to be hurt, it is usually instrumental, designed to induce guilt, regain control, or manipulate empathy. Their emotional pain is real, but their expression of it is strategic rather than relational. One of the clearest indicators that a narcissist has been wounded is retaliation. Clinicians describe this as a defensive response to narcissistic injury, a perceived threat to their fragile self-concept. Narcissists retaliate not because they seek resolution, but because restoring dominance soothes their internal dysregulation. This is precisely why therapists caution against revenge. When retaliation appears, it confirms that their ego has been punctured, but it also signals escalation. Narcissists do not fight to heal, they fight to win. Another sign of narcissistic injury is sudden cut-off or discard. In intimate relationships, this may take the form of abrupt abandonment. In families or friendships, it often looks like being erased overnight. Psychologically, this reflects the narcissist's inability to tolerate perceived rejection or disappointment. Unlike emotionally mature individuals, they do not process rupture through dialogue or repair. Cutting someone off allows them to avoid shame and regain a sense of control. Ironically, while they expect endless forgiveness and second chances for their own behavior, they grant none to others. Even a simple boundary, saying no, canceling plans, expressing a differing need, can trigger a complete severing of ties. Smear campaigns are another hallmark response to narcissistic injury. Psychologists describe this as an externalization defense. The narcissist offloads shame and self-loathing by projecting it onto the victim. The goal is twofold: punish the target and preserve their public image. If you are experiencing a smear campaign, clinicians emphasize that this is not evidence of your failure, but of their injury. The narcissist must see that they are causing you distress. If the reaction they seek is not forthcoming, they often lose interest and move on to a new source of supply. With that context established, it becomes easier to understand what genuinely hurts a narcissist, not in a vindictive sense, but in a psychological one. The first and most significant is indifference. Indifference strikes at the core of narcissistic pathology. Narcissists rely on external validation to regulate their self-esteem. When you respond with neutrality rather than emotional engagement, you are no longer reflecting their grandiose self-image back to them. From their perspective, this feels like annihilation. Clinicians often recommend strategies such as gray rock or yellow rock, not to punish the narcissist, but to protect the survivor from manipulation. Emotional non-reactivity reduces access to your nervous system, which is ultimately an act of self-preservation. Shame is another experience that deeply destabilizes a narcissist. Psychologists explain that narcissistic grandiosity exists precisely to defend against overwhelming, unconscious shame. When shame surfaces, whether through exposure, failure, or loss of admiration, it often erupts as narcissistic rage. The rage is not strength, it is panic. Narcissists lack the emotional capacity to metabolize shame, so they discharge it outward through blame, aggression, or contempt. This is profoundly painful for them, even though they will never sit with the feeling long enough to learn from it. Importantly, therapists emphasize that survivors must address their own shame as part of recovery. Narcissists are exceptionally skilled at identifying shame vulnerabilities in others and exploiting them. If a survivor carries unresolved shame about their worth, boundaries, or identity, the narcissist will weaponize it. Over time, this erodes self-esteem and reinforces trauma bonds. Healing shame through therapy, self-compassion, and reality-based self-assessment removes one of the narcissist's most powerful tools. Many survivors notice how socially embarrassing narcissistic behavior appears once they step outside the relational fog. As one observer insightfully noted, narcissists often look manic, forceful, and unaware when their defenses are not reinforced by others. Psychologists agree. Narcissistic defenses mask profound insecurity. Without those defenses, the narcissist would be flooded with self-consciousness and humiliation. Ironically, it is those same defenses that perpetuate their destructive behavior. Finally, no contact is one of the most impactful experiences for a narcissist, not because it punishes them, but because it deprives them of access. From a psychological perspective, narcissists expect permanence in their role within others' lives. Going no contact contradicts this assumption. It communicates without explanation or argument that they are no longer relevant. For the survivor, no contact is not about proving strength. It is about restoring nervous system regulation, clarity, and self-trust. For the narcissist, it represents a loss of control, and that loss is deeply unsettling. Ultimately, psychologists remind survivors that the goal is not to hurt the narcissist, but to heal oneself. The narcissist's pain is largely self-generated and unavoidable. Your task is not to administer karma, but to reclaim your life, your peace, and your integrity. That is not only the healthiest path forward, it is the one outcome narcissistic pathology can never truly compete with. At the core of every narcissistic reaction described here is a psychological truth that clinicians repeatedly emphasize. Narcissism is not rooted in confidence, but in profound insecurity. Even though narcissists will never admit this, either to others or to themselves, their entire grandiose or false self exists as a defensive structure designed to protect them from unbearable feelings of inadequacy, worthlessness, and shame. Psychologists describe this false self as a psychological armor. When your behavior, especially indifference or emotional withdrawal, pierces that armor, it directly activates the insecurities the narcissist has spent a lifetime avoiding. What hurts them is not rejection alone, but the sudden collapse of the illusion that they are indispensable, superior, or central to your emotional world. This is why so many clinicians agree with the observation that the only revenge that truly works is no contact. As one survivor insightfully noted, conflict is the narcissist's natural habitat. From a psychological standpoint, conflict provides stimulation, validation, and a sense of relevance. It allows the narcissist to feel powerful, reactive, and emotionally impactful. Indifference, by contrast, offers nothing to feed on. Therapists often describe it as psychological starvation. No contact and emotional neutrality remove the narcissist from the relational arena entirely, which is far more destabilizing than anger or confrontation. For the survivor, staying out of the pig pen, as the comment so vividly described, is not avoidance, it is boundary enforcement and nervous system protection. Another experience that deeply wounds a narcissist is watching you build genuine happiness without them. Psychologists explain that narcissists need to believe they are the source of your well-being. This belief reinforces their sense of importance and control. When you appear fulfilled, peaceful, or emotionally stable after separation, it contradicts their core narrative, that you are incomplete without them. For survivors, this phase is often paradoxical. Trauma bonding can make separation excruciating at first, even when the relationship was abusive. But as healing progresses and self-generated happiness returns, the narcissist experiences this as a narcissistic injury. It signals not only loss of control, but loss of meaning. Importantly, clinicians stress that living your best life is not about performance or provocation. It is about reinvesting energy back into the self. As another survivor aptly described, your happiness becomes a form of sweet revenge without karmic backlash. This distinction matters. From a psychological perspective, when your motivation shifts from hurting the narcissist to loving yourself, you exit the trauma bond. That internal shift is what ultimately frees you. The narcissist may feel the impact, but your healing is no longer contingent on their reaction. One area where many survivors become psychologically entangled is the urge to expose the narcissist. Therapists approach this with caution. While exposure can sometimes happen organically, especially when boundaries are firmly set and no contact is established, actively exposing a narcissist as a form of revenge is often dangerous. Narcissists are highly vindictive and lack empathy, meaning they are willing to cross lines most people would never consider. Psychologists warn that exposure without a clean break can escalate harassment, smear campaigns, and emotional retaliation. The few cases where survivors get away with it typically involve minimal shared social circles and immediate, total disengagement. Even then, clinicians caution against it, not for moral reasons, but for psychological safety. There is, however, an interesting nuance when it comes to certain types of narcissists, particularly covert narcissists. Unlike their overt counterparts, covert narcissists are deeply invested in appearing morally good. Psychologists note that these individuals operate with rigid black and white thinking. People are either all good or all bad, including themselves. When evidence threatens their good person identity, it can destabilize them profoundly. If any part of that message penetrates their defenses, and this is rare, it can trigger intense shame. Shame, for a narcissist, is not a reflective emotion. It is an existential threat. It collapses their internal structure and often leads to rage, withdrawal, or further projection. Survivors often recognize this dynamic because they have lived on the receiving end of it. When the narcissist painted them as all bad, the cruelty was relentless. Psychologists point out that imagining the narcissist turning that same lens inward reveals how intolerable that internal state would be. Shame floods in, and because the narcissist cannot metabolize it, they either expel it outward or frantically rebuild their grandiose defenses. The blunt comment describing narcissists as stupid may not be clinically precise, but the emotional truth behind it reflects survivor exhaustion with this rigid, primitive style of thinking. Ultimately, one of the most painful experiences for a narcissist is the loss of control. Control is not merely a preference, it is a regulatory mechanism. Psychologists explain that narcissists use control to manage internal chaos. Even small losses of control over decisions, leadership, or attention can feel deeply unsettling. They believe they are uniquely capable, uniquely right, and uniquely entitled to lead. When that assumption is challenged, even in mundane ways, it registers as an injury. The most devastating loss of control occurs when the narcissist realizes they no longer have access to you. This realization often unfolds in stages. Early on, they may test boundaries, provoke reactions, or attempt charm. When those tactics fail, they escalate, reaching out through mutual friends or family, as one survivor described. Clinicians see this as a last-ditch attempt to reassert relevance. For the survivor, recognizing these stages is crucial. Each attempt confirms not your weakness, but your growing independence. Psychologists consistently emphasize that the true endgame is not hurting the narcissist, but reclaiming autonomy. When control is gone, the narcissist must confront the emptiness they have spent a lifetime avoiding. You, meanwhile, have the opportunity to build a life rooted in self-trust, emotional safety, and dignity. That divergence, your healing versus their stagnation, is not revenge. It is resolution.